Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be finally able to make it to a CoMotion. I've heard lovely things from many of you in the audience and to see many lovely faces. I'm also really thrilled that we're part of this session that's focused on goods movement. I think a lot of the conversation around transportation and mobility is dominated by moving people, but it's very important to make sure we don't forget about all the goods that are out there and the fun, innovative ways that we can start moving them. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, since they could probably do it better than I could, and then we'll jump into some questions and hopefully leave some time for you all at the end if you have any questions in return. So I'm just going to go down the line, have you all give us a couple minutes, and then we'll jump into the actual panel part.
Can you? Jesus Christ. My name is Jesus Christ. I'm the mayor. That's my given name, but my real name is I'm John Erickson. Boom. Okay, there we go. We're in for a good time. I'm John Erickson. I have the great privilege of being the mayor of the city of West Hollywood. It's a small city no one's really ever heard of, and we never do anything quite controversial. But I am really great to be here. We do a lot of work with serve robotics and goods movement, and anything I can do to be in the good graces of our soon-to-be robotic overlords, I will always come and make sure that we're talking positively about them.
Good afternoon. My name is Ernest Huffman. I'm with North Central Texas Council of Governments. I manage our aviation planning and education program area. For the context of this discussion, I primarily introduced the unmanned aviation technologies to the DFW region, and subsequently I'm working the multimodal angle where we're working with all types of autonomous ground vehicles as well, and integration.
Hi everyone, my name is Vignesh Ram. I go by Viggy. I lead public policy at Serve Robotics. Hopefully we won't be your robotic overlords, but we'll serve you. Ultimately, this company started in order to solve a very simple problem, which is why do we move a 2-pound burrito in a 2-ton car? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You're spending more energy trying to move the car than you are the burrito itself. And short distance deliveries of 1.5 miles or less constitute half of all food deliveries globally, which means, and that's true for LA as well. So in Los Angeles, there are upwards of 3 million car trips per month in which you are moving a burrito or a pizza a distance that's shorter than 1.5 miles. And ultimately, I think this is a way for us to create communities that are safer, have less carbon emissions, and far less congestion, and hopefully we can continue to work to expand our footprint here. But if you're spending a little bit of time downtown, you'll probably see our robots around. We do operate here, and we also operate in North Central Texas outside of Dallas and Frisco. We have a partnership with Wing where we do a multimodal delivery option where a robot hands off a delivery to a drone that does the final leg of the trip. So we're excited to be here.
I think the solution is just we need bigger burritos. I'm on board with that. I also realized I didn't introduce myself. I just jumped right in. We're like fresh out of lunch. We don't know what we're doing here. Robin Markey, I lead the Innovative Mobility team at CalSTART. We're a nonprofit focused on the clean transportation industry. And my team in particular works on both people and goods, which is why I noted I'm thrilled to be talking about goods, because that is actually my background and what I researched when I was an academic nerd before breaking into public sector and now nonprofit space. Okay, now I'm going to get into the questions. Now you know who we all are. So first up, looking at urban congestion. We know nothing about that in LA or where I live, New York City. Congestion's not a problem at all. It is a challenge, and part of the solution could certainly be some of the technologies that we're talking about today. So how can things like delivery robots, drones that were kind of mentioned already, help to alleviate these issues? And what are some of the hurdles to large-scale implementation in these densely populated areas? So Viggy, I think I'll start with you since you kind of started teasing a little bit of your deployments already.
Yeah. So goods movement, I think you'll hear a lot of people talk about long distance freight and last mile, and the differences between the two. And there's been a huge focus on last mile at conferences like these over the last couple of years. It's the same reason you hear about curb modernization endlessly, and now it seems like it's actually a real thing. But many of the revolutions that we've seen in long distance freight have not translated to last mile delivery. There's a reason why it costs you $2 to get something from China and $8 to get something from Chinatown. And the entire reason is in long distance freight, we've seen improvements to the supply chain in terms of automation and efficiency that has basically allowed us to go from having a fleet that's the size of the British military at its height, to just having fewer than 50 people being able to manage a barge and be able to transport a number of goods across the Pacific Ocean. We have not seen those gains in productivity in last mile delivery. 100 years ago, you might have had 2 postmen, now you have 1. That's just a 50% increase in terms of the 50% increase in terms of the efficiency that you're getting out of that last mile leg. And what that's done is it's perverted our incentives. So how many of you have ordered something on Amazon over the course of the last 6 months? Yeah, and I'm sure the things that you ordered on Amazon, you would have preferred to buy from a local business if it was available to you to be able to receive that same day, am I right? And the reason this is challenging is to do that short distance trip, dispatching one individual to go and do it is not particularly sustainable. Everyone complains about the cost of food delivery. It's not just customers, delivery drivers are always saying, look, like we're not paid enough, and restaurants don't like having to pay a kickback to these platforms in order to deliver food. So there are a lot of opportunities here to right-size delivery so that we're not spending our time with these large machines that are moving very small items, but we can really look at modalities like robots, like drones, and other forms, including cyclists and sort of more traditional forms that work together to so that we can see these improvements on last mile.
Ernest, you want to take that next?
And I want to speak specifically to the point he just was making on using these technologies for the greater good. One of the things we're doing, we got a pilot program in the city of Arlington. It's a Department of Energy drone, multimodal drone delivery program where we're doing Wheels on Meals type food deliveries to locations in the city of Arlington, underserved community, but we're using air drones and ground drones to do so. So think we're launching the particular packages from an air drone to a ground drone, placing those particular packages in a ground drone or ground vehicle, similar to the type of vehicle these guys have, and is driving around the neighborhood where these individuals can come out, get their meals on wheels without the hassle of having the driver service. Because one of the big issues with that particular type of service is they don't have drivers, they don't have the volunteers doing the work anymore. So we can supplement that service with these particular types of technologies. Reduce emissions. One of the big deals in Texas is we're trying to reduce casualties on the road, and this will help us do so.
So West Hollywood is one of the densest cities in all of California. We're 1.9 square miles. We go from La Brea to Doheny, little parts of Melrose. If you have a parking ticket, you're in LA. If, it depends, the border, up to Sunset in certain parts. So we're a really built out city, but we have a really robust small business network of individuals from different types of to-go restaurants that used to have maybe delivery vehicles, like as cars, moving these types of goods. But since our Serve Robotics pilot program, what we've really seen is the success of our local businesses to do more business directly in our community with these vehicles to ensure that they're not paying excess fees. When we saw the pandemic happening, it brought on a whole different level of customer relationships for people that didn't want to really approach a driver or someone to hand off their food. It was someone that was coming up to your ability to be met. And I think mostly from a policymaker standpoint, when we look at the ways in which, how do we take away red tape, financial burdens from small businesses or larger corporations in general, these are tools that we can really utilize to do that. I'll give one example. So I eat at a place called Otis Thai on La Brea more times than I should publicly admit, right? But specifically, they've been able to hire more people to work at the restaurant, and West Hollywood has the highest minimum wage in the country with historic sick and leave provisions, right? To earn more money for their lives and communities. versus having to pay a kickback to a third-party company or anything else. And these Serve Robotics, they come and they deliver, and it's on and off, and our community has really learned to trust them. And so it's a really local success story for our businesses right there to actually hire more people to work in the business versus something else.
So it sounds like I'm going to have to visit that place while I'm here. I live in Hell's Kitchen in New York City, and I'm surrounded by amazing Thai food. So you're speaking my language right now. And Vicky, I want to also just thank you for shouting out, traditional or not, new shiny object tech solutions, cargo bikes. Even where I am, we have a lot of people walking around with goods, depending on the density of the neighborhood and mixed-use buildings there. So I think there's a really wide spectrum of solutions available and still a lot of space to innovate. So we talked a bit about urban. I want to look a little bit at rural to make sure that we're not only considering these solutions in one type of use case or context. So Ernest, I'm guessing your COG spans quite a lot of different kinds of communities, so this is probably most relevant to the breadth of your work, but similar to the question on the urban context, how are logistics companies, technology developers, public-private sector addressing these challenges in more rural areas where infrastructure might not be as developed as it is in their urban counterparts?
Yeah, just for context, the region I represent is the full Dallas-Fort Worth region. Is 16 counties. We got 44 cities with population of 50,000 or more, and each one of those particular cities are individual in what they're trying to do from a tech perspective. So just dealing with that and the varying challenges with integrating new technologies and all in that type of environment is extreme. But in Texas, they make it easier. One of the things we've been doing in terms of the rural context is looking at these technologies for middle mile deliveries. We have a lot of autonomous freight movement already in the region. We're going to use the advanced air mobility, the large eVTOL aircraft for last mile or middle mile delivery. We'll talk. Middle mile delivery. One of the industries I'm looking at focusing on in our region is semiconductor and moving that type of stuff. We got a few of those processing plants being developed in North Texas right now. Another thing is to connect our particular rural communities to the metropolitan area, because a lot of folks or they live in the rural communities, but they work in the metro areas. There's a lot of folks in my particular building. We're headquartered in Arlington, which is in the dab smack center into the metroplex. A lot of folks live in the rural areas, and they commute an hour and change every day to get to where we're at. So we want to use the technologies to help not only move the goods, but move those people to and from those places. Another piece is we want to connect our tribal nations, so the reservations in southern Oklahoma and some of those tribal nations in North Texas to the opportunities, because they typically are in the rural areas. So we want to connect those folks to opportunities and allow those businesses to have that logistical opportunity to move their packages and their goods around without having the driver services and those other things that they'll need in a traditional sense.
So you're welcome to chime in, but figured it was most relevant to Ernest.
Well, you said something that's really interesting. So West Hollywood is surrounded by a smaller city called Los Angeles on three sides, and then Beverly Hills, right? And we all take different approaches to technology, as you were saying, city by city, right? So in Beverly Hills, you're not allowed to do a lot. All respect to my friends in Beverly, like you can't have a scooter. I don't think they have delivery. Paige will tell me no delivery services in that way. Los Angeles is very different district by district. We have 3 council members that kind of over where we are. And so it's like a push-pull with us, right? So whereas we're investing in new technologies like this to be built out, other cities might not be. So it's kind of a disadvantage to our communities in a larger way in Los Angeles to benefit from these areas, because instead of taking a holistic kind of county-based approach, and that's a pipe dream because LA County's a very big county, but specifically by not taking regional, I think, approaches to how we improve technology services, I think we're really disadvantaged. The public's at a disadvantage because there are things literally where I live on Fountain that people right across the street can't even enjoy or deal with, right? And I don't think that's really fair, right? And so I think we need to work better as leaders to create more streamlined processes for these new technologies to occur.
I was actually going to mention, specifically, I touched upon our partnership with Wing, the drone delivery service in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. The reason this has been important for us is that a food delivery robot will generally tend to do deliveries that are about a mile and a half. For a lot of reasons, nobody wants to wait over 30 minutes for their meal to show up. You're not going to have a good pizza. But what the drone partnership has allowed us to do is you don't end up with a number of drones that are hovering outside of a restaurant waiting to pick up whatever the order is, or even if you're thinking about a non-restaurant business. Let's say there's an Ace Hardware and someone is trying to get an Allen wrench from the Ace Hardware. You don't want, a drone that's just hovering outside of it waiting to do the pickup. So instead what happens is we're able to do the pickup in these sort of dense corridors. We then take it to a landing site where the bin opens up and we raise, it's almost like a little ladder and with a mount at the top of it. And the order goes to the top, and then a drone will come with a winch and it'll pick up the order, and then it extends our delivery radius by 5 to 10 miles. So now we're able to use this autonomous solution to not just make, Otis High available to someone who lives in the neighborhood, but to someone who may be living in a rural community, someone who may be living in an ex-urban community for whom the cost of delivery can feel prohibitive. So, when we talk about right-sizing delivery, it isn't just right-sizing the actual modality to what's being delivered, but also the distance that the item is being delivered.
And I failed to mention, I'm glad he brought up the Wing example. The Dallas region has been denoted the FAA's Unmanned Traffic Management Key Site, which essentially means all those drone delivery companies are using our area to figure out how they're going to manage and deconflict from each other's operations. And subsequently, that's brought a lot of use cases or business cases to the region, to the point where Walmart is committed to deploying drone deliveries to 75% of our Metroplex by the end of this year. Every week, another city comes online, and subsequently, they've been doing it from rural cities into the Metroplex. So, for example, all of our cities on the perimeter are starting to get drone deliveries now, where the metropolitan areas don't necessarily have them. And that's giving those folks in the rural communities access to these new technologies, access to the workforce opportunities, where typically they wouldn't get it. So we think of the drone deliveries not just as an opportunity to get these folks their goods and their pizzas and their ice creams to watch their movies on time, but also as a push for workforce development. We're training more drone pilots, more drone maintainers, more drone manufacturers, et cetera, in our region because of the FAA key site related designation.
So, John, Mr. Mayor, on this stage, you're John. In your responses, you've really touched a lot on equity inclusion in these solutions. So, just want to expand on that with all of your responses, and how can we make sure that these innovations are available to a diverse set of communities, and not just the consumers or recipients of the goods, but the businesses that want to access these technologies and address their logistics challenges?
So I want to expand our program. So Viggy's hearing that now, and Paige at the city's hearing that now. And I won't talk about flying drones at the moment because I would probably be murdered, but that's another story. But specifically, when we look at the different types of availabilities with a limited stock, it really does kind of place it on those that maybe have the resources to do it or want to engage. And I think that's unfortunate. So by expanding, I think we open to it because we have a lot of creative businesses in West Hollywood that do deliver things of all sorts, not just food and goods movement like that. And so I think specifically, though, I look at the people in West Hollywood, right? So we're one of the 8 cities still in the state of California with a rent stabilization ordinance. We have people in rent stabilized or rent controlled housing, right? And these people tend to be older, may have disabilities, or might, be at a certain income level where they might and do utilize these services, right? So it's more so how do we get it to our community? I'm not necessarily worried about our businesses signing up. They'll sign up. Like we get them the keys, they'll take the car, right? But I really appreciated when I would hear back from older adults in my community that said they were able to get their medicine or food delivered to them, or specifically, I look at some of our amazing nonprofit providers. So West Hollywood provides around $7 to $8 million in social services, but we partner with Project Angel Food, if you know what Project Angel Food is, right? Project Angel Food needs drivers all the time, and it's easy for me to go pick up 30 meals and drive them all over the city, but how can we also help? It's the connection with the people, so that's the piece, right? But if we needed to in a pinch, how can we utilize that to get to at-risk communities? And so I think that's one way. As long as people that need it the most are always at the front of your mind, I think you can't make a wrong decision.
Yeah, I think I'm going to kind of take this from a sort of a different angle on equity and inclusion, but there's some parts of this where for us, being able to deliver to someone who may have an autoimmune disorder, or we had a partnership with Rex and Parks during the LA teacher strike to be able to help facilitate food delivery orders to young children. But those are sort of like individual examples. But I think when we think sort of at the broader ecosystem and how technology is developed and deployed, I think it's important to take an inclusive design approach to how you design these new technologies. So I'm going to talk specifically about our robot specifically was initially designed with consultation from senior living communities as well as from disabled communities, and they gave us significant feedback around everything from sound design. So like having intermittent sound allows someone who may be hard of vision or blind to be able to tell whether a robot is moving toward them or away from them. Initially we heard some feedback about, you all didn't think about putting Braille on the robot. Maybe you should really think about that, which, if you're not a member of the community, you might not think about immediately. So for all of the technology operators here, I would definitely have you consider on the front end, making sure you're including that input, because it'll greatly improve the product that you're developing. We did all of our early testing at a senior living facility outside of the Bay Area called Rossmore, and we got to work very closely with folks who may have ambulatory challenges, people who are using mobility aids. And it helped us learn how to yield the right-of-way, how to approach a curb cut and back up so that someone is able to enter the curb, so that pedestrians are favored in the intersection. And then for the planners who are here, there may be this open question. I think there's always this values question about the on-demand economy. Is it a good thing that we want things now, or is it not? And that's a good philosophical argument to have, but there was a sort of a different aspect of this that I think really came to light during the pandemic. We saw a proliferation of alfresco dining in communities across the country. We've seen slow streets programs in major metros, not just in the United States, but globally. And in all of these moments, there have been opportunities for people to take back their cities, right? You don't need to hop in a car to go and do everything. You can actually spend time in these public spaces. The 3 million cars per month that are doing food deliveries that are shorter than a mile and a half aren't taking back your city. They're clogging your streets. They're the one, because of them, you are now getting home half an hour later and you get to spend less time with your kid. And then you go back outside and you don't have common spaces to be able to spend with your neighbors. So what we do in West Hollywood and in LA is we'll share back with the city areas in which there could be public infrastructure improvements. And ultimately, I think in the long term, we'd like to see more sidewalks, more bike lanes, less subsidies for automobiles that are parked within our rights of way. And so you might think of technologies oh my goodness, is this just big tech coming in and trying to automate something so that we just have to work more or whatever. But I think in this instance, we're actually able to really take back the public space to our communities, and ultimately, along with getting things when we want, be able to spend more time with the people we love.
And from my perspective, the thing that we're trying to do to ensure that this technologies can be used by everybody in our community is I'm lobbying for regionally owned and operated infrastructure. So when I talked about UTM earlier, and we haven't reached a solution yet on what the UTM infrastructure will look like in a regional area like us. But as soon as we do, I'm looking for us to fund something like that where we regionally control it and we can dictate or use that as leverage against operators on getting them to go to places and operate in places they typically wouldn't, or the business case doesn't necessarily iron out for them. So we'll bear the brunt of the cost on the infrastructure component, save them some cost on UTM or whatever else we can do on the infrastructure side, and then allow them to operate in some of those communities they typically, or their business case wouldn't allow for. Like some of the, and we have tons of those disenfranchised communities in our region that need to be accommodated for. Luckily, and the way the industry is scaling now, they're operating in those, and they're matriculating to those areas naturally. So we haven't had to leverage anything just yet, but I know once these industries come to scale, and we have more like swarms of these BVLOS drones and more of these ground bots walking and operating in our cities, we'll need this infrastructure, and it needs to be regionally controlled, analogous to like your airport. Your airport has grant assurances. Operators can only, they got rules they have to follow because that's a federally funded airport.
So Ernest, I'm going to stay with you because in an earlier response, you spoke a bit about workforce. And want you all to just expand a bit on what are some of the implications of this transition on workforce, economic implications, and in particular skill sets that might be needed, and to your point, Viggy, on the front end, and I think also in using the applied technology.
Yeah, so part of my job is we do aviation career outreach, and that's the main reason why I'm in the role that I am. Is we like to go to schools and educate kids on aviation-related careers and trying to commit them or convince them to come to our particular industry. Big thing with these new aviation sectors, the eVTOLs, advanced air mobility, drone delivery. It's a new frontier for aviation. It's new, it's fun, it's fruitful, and I happen to be in a region that represents a lot of aerospace manufacturing, a lot of aviation-related IP. So we always say 1 in every 6 person works in an aviation industry in our region. So the degrees of separation between you and somebody who's in aviation is very small, and we try to use that particular, what's the word I'm looking for? That mechanism as an impetus to continue to grow that industry. So when I say that, I want the drone industry, the eVTOL manufacturers, all of that to find a home in North Texas. And because it's new, it's all in its incubation. It represents a full-fledged opportunity for all involved, and that's what we like to talk about, the opportunity inherent in these new technologies that folks who traditionally wouldn't be involved in aviation can now take advantage of. You can get your drone license at 16 years old and start working as a professional drone pilot at that particular age, and we start from that particular, from that level. We got hundreds of different schools that have drone programs already. They've been doing that already. And we're using that those particular programs as a backbone to introduce them to all these other career paths. So I say that to say, if you're looking for a skilled workforce or a workforce to train that's interested and knowledgeable about these new technologies, we've been doing a great job throughout the years educating them on it. Come to North Texas.
Yeah, I'm going to mention automation gives us a lot of opportunities to upskill our workforce. 5 years ago, you'd come to CoMotion and you'd see a lot of talk about dockless. There's a lot of scooters, or a lot of bikes, all of that. And I think we saw they would just be dropped everywhere in our cities, and we weren't sure what the implications were for the workforce. Are people getting to work sooner? Who's repairing those scooters? Do they even need to be repaired, or are they just thrown away at the end of the day? And automation is quite different. Anytime that we are expanding to a new community, Number one, we need our robots to be at near full utilization, which means we're not going to have them idling in the middle of the street. We're not going to be blocking the public rights of way for extended amounts of time. There's no induced demand in automation, unlike other mobility modalities. But when we do those expansions, we do need to find a brick and mortar location. We need a place where we can repair LiDAR, where we can make sure that the ultrasonic sensors, as a form of sonar, are actually tuned and operating correctly. What happens if our suspension is rocked off because we got hit by a car? It has to come back to a location and be repaired. And these are not, these are technical jobs. They're ones for folks who might have been on their high school or college robotics teams. It's for folks who may have served in the military and maybe re-entering civilian life and looking for opportunities to find work. And so every time that we're moving into these new communities, it's not like a tech company that's a black box that exists somewhere else. We actually have a presence on the ground. We are hiring employees. These are high quality jobs, and we really see our positions being quite meaningful in terms of building those relationships and continuing to build that pipeline.
Yeah, I think when I look at workforce development in regards to automation, I haven't seen any statistics of the groups or the businesses in West Hollywood that are firing all their employees clearly to, have a robot do everything for you. I mean, it's a made up, I think, analogy for people that, well, in our town, people kept saying, you're taking away someone from getting paid $20 an hour for a robot. And I'm like, well, do you have the facts on that? And they're like, oh, we got to go. I think that if you give businesses tools of all sorts, they do use them, right? Every business is looking for a way to cut costs. That's clear. Everyone knows that, right? During the pandemic, during inflation, during now, people are looking at how they can save money, right? Because also businesses do care about their employees. I know you can have a conversation about that, but people want to invest in their community and their businesses, and especially small businesses and communities of color that are small businesses are very community driven and invest back locally, right? So it's important to keep those facts front of mind. And I think, when I look at the different types of education and post-delivery where the robots go, or when we look at how do we get the new workforce going, that's LA's bread and butter. Innovation, excellence, trying to figure out the next technology before it's even out there. And I think it just only strives people to be more. And Vicky said something that was really interesting, and this is very true, right? And it's where the dockless scooters, right, are everywhere, right? So, and the point of dockless scooters is to, drive it to wherever you're going, but not at a dock, right? I prefer docking it somewhere and then walking a little bit. I think you can walk, right? But specifically, we don't get complaints about the robots because they're literally getting out of your way. They're not tipped over unless someone tipped it over, and it's really hard to do that. Truly, it's the hardest thing you could ever try to do. I've tried. I hope it's not on camera. But they really are cognizant of the communities in which they are, right? And so it's weird to say it, but when they're more mindset of people with different abilities, people with different communities, driving onto the little grass on some sidewalks to get around people versus a scooter or other technology companies that just dump it, right? That says more to me about investment in local business, local abilities for tools like this.
So on the local note, or even regional, looking at the role of policy and policymakers in this space, I'm a reformed public servant, so I have many opinions here, coming from a state that had mixed open arms to new technologies. How can policymakers be balancing the need of all the great things and benefits that we've largely been talking about with keeping the public safe, with cybersecurity issues, regulatory frameworks? You are kind of the leading edge of welcoming this kind of testing and adoption. I'd say exception, not the rule at this part. So, how can, as policymakers, you kind of establish those frameworks and provide a blueprint for others to feel comfortable in welcoming these kinds of technologies?
I can start. In Texas, it's a little easier because they allow the cities to do what they want in terms of individually, unless there's a law on the state books that prohibits it, which there aren't prohibiting any of these technologies we're discussing today. So it's relatively easy for them to get involved, but they have to invest themselves because the state won't invest. So the state of Texas doesn't invest in infrastructure, in particular outside of roads. If it's anything else, they're not going to pay for it. So if you want to get it done, you got to find your way, and people tend to do that. But in terms of getting in front of the policy folks, so I write bills myself, and we'll send them out to downstate. We get sit on tons of advisory boards, but what the main thing I like to do is outreach. So I do outreach to all of our city governments. We have regional city committees, transportation committees, but then I'll go to Rotary clubs. I'll go to chambers of commerce, your business corp, your schools. I present to anyone and everything. Shoot, I did a Denton Film Festival just to get the word out to those particular folks because they won't know. And in today's climate, the last thing folks are really thinking about are these advanced technologies right now, right? They're thinking about everything else going on in their city government. So you have to jump rope between those particular hurdles. But once you're able to, and in Texas, it's relatively easy getting in front of those folks. There's a lot of different mechanisms.
Yeah, this, one of the challenges I think we face is a lack of consistency across different markets that we're looking to deploy in. When people hear about delivery robots, they're like, electric scooter meets AV, and those two are both really regulated spaces in their own way. Every community has a perspective on electric scooters and has figured out some system for how they manage it. And the places that have AVs, there is, usually a large regulatory body at the state level that's figuring out what the rules of the road are for AVs. And we're kind of both, but we're also kind of neither. So we're often looking for collaboration from the local communities to make sure that they understand what those guardrails ought to look like. For us, one of the things that we did when we started in West Hollywood was we started with a pilot that allowed us to operate 3 robots. 6 months later, we were able to operate an additional 3 robots. But we were regularly reporting out how many deliveries we were doing, any safety incidents that would come up. And currently, we're able to operate up to 20. Our friends over at Coco, who are over there, also operate another 20. So there are 40 robots that are operating concurrently in a 1.9 square mile radius. And if you go to West Hollywood right now, you'll still be able to get around. And I think that's a real testament to the work that was done on the front end to make sure that this program is responsive to the community itself. Especially because on the front end, there were people who were kicking and screaming. They were like, oh my goodness, what's this going to do? So I think figuring out ways to be responsive, be a little bit agile in the beginning, and then develop a framework that where compliance makes sense. There are a lot of markets where there are weight limits on robots, and that prevented operators. We have mechanical brakes on our robots, and the reason we have mechanical brakes is if your power goes out, you don't want the robot to roll down a hill and hit someone. But there were a bunch of regulators that passed weight limits because they believed, wrongly, that it would be safer, even though you would end up with electric brakes and the brakes would disengage. Right? And that's a situation where we need to educate the lawmakers on this. We need to make sure that we are providing our rationale for why increasing a weight limit makes sense and the types of technologies that can increase public safety. Ultimately for us, every delivery that's done by a robot would otherwise be done by a car. And robots carry 1/3000th the kinetic energy of a car. So it's already safer. So if you're going to make it impossible for us to operate, you're just diverting all these orders to the more dangerous option, which I'm sure you don't want to do. Right? So what we're trying to do here is find a way to collaborate and figure out a consistent solution. We do engage with an organization called the Urban Robotics Foundation, which is based in Canada, and they're developing the IEEE standards for deployment of sidewalk delivery robots. And through that work, we've been able to inform them in terms of what the rules of the road should be. Should we have brake lights on robots so that you're able to communicate intent? What does the sound design look like? How do you approach an intersection? We even found that when we were entering intersections on curb cuts, if we were going parallel to the flow of traffic, it was quite likely that someone would make a right turn and crash into us. So then we started favoring going perpendicular to traffic. So if we need to get to the caddy corner at an intersection, we'll go perpendicular first. It increases visibility, it reduces the number of accidents that are happening. And this is an opportunity for us to actually have our incentives aligned with the cities we operate in, because cities also don't want to see crashes. They don't want to see accidents. I want to say one last thing about this, which is that, ultimately, I think with regard to the regulatory environment and emerging technologies, it's really easy to look at the car crash that's happening in Washington, but we have a lot of urban planners here, and who's better to deal with car crashes than urban planners, right? This is the real tip of the spear in being able to solve some of these challenges.
Yeah, you have to get out of the cacophony of like unwell people. You know, like, because if you were to go to a public meeting, like for city council, right, like, it's people that like hate this issue, right? A lot of the times, people that show up aren't like, oh my God, I love you, I love these robots, like, God bless you, like, can we get 50 more? No, it's the person that's like, I hate this robot. No, they usually name them. I hate Marcia. That's one of the names of the robots, right? She's evil. I mean, they're quite fun. It's a Parks and Rec episode on speed, right? But like, you have to get away from that to make good policy, truly, right? Because at the end of the day, when we're looking at the regulation of these devices, the data does speak for itself, right? I think that cities, wrongly, way overcompensated for dockless scooters. I think they just regulated them to death. I think that, frankly, like, the reason why companies were merging or failing or not doing anything is because every city had a different one. Like, you couldn't drive through Beverly Hills at a certain, you still can't. But like, it really just shut them down, right? With this, and the data still showed usage, right? Like in West Hollywood, for a pilot program that took freaking forever because it was, like 5 years, well, it's 2.5, right? I mean, like 400,000 trips in like 2 years. That's like 15 times the population of our city, right? And within our boundaries. That number speaks for itself. Looking at the 40, when it went from 20 to 40, the number and usage and then lack of accidents is where you decide why we should invest in these technologies, right? And so working and getting in front of the communities is critical. I do give a shout out to Serve and other companies in West Hollywood that really do sit in the firing squad and just let people really try to figure out how it works. Education does help 99% of the time. You can never legislate for that 1%, and that's okay. But when we really let data drive policy at the local level, we do see a lot of successes. And I think that when our different technologies are allowed to kind of be out there and almost figure it out with urban planners, city government, I think we get more successes than failures. And frankly, when we look at the investment that it gives back to us, right, as a city, we now know because of Serve what streets are extremely dangerous, so they're not helping our Vision Zero plan, right? We know what sidewalks are completely non-ADA compliant because they help geotech and map out our sidewalks in a way that we can't, right? And so they give us so much more data, so then when we take our money and invest in streets, trees, and sidewalks, it really is coming from that lived space. And I think that's where that success is a partnership.
Viggy, you made a point on the weight restrictions that reminded me of one of my favorite funny, not so funny tales. A few years ago in New York City specifically, when I was working for the state, through its budget bill, legalized e-bikes. And we saw the draft language of it to weigh in as a state agency that would probably be overseeing programs that would really increase adoption. And at the last minute, one of the lawmakers put in a width restriction, which stopped in its tracks the cargo bike pilots that New York City DOT had been pretty far along on already. They had the big companies, Amazon, UPS, et cetera, on board. They had models sourced, they were ready to go, and they were wider than what the width restriction was. And they were kind of on the side, like, should we just do it anyway? Are we gonna be in legal trouble if we do it? And just somebody thought, well, if a bike lane's typically X wide, or if it's two-way and you want to pass someone, then no one device on it should be wider than 36 inches. But cargo bikes that are narrower than a certain width are unstable and tip over and can't carry as much goods. But they thought, well, this makes sense because numbers, but they weren't educated to know, well, that's a terrible idea, actually, and here's the ripple effect that it will cause by putting that in law. And now we're just kind of coming back to a renaissance of cargo bikes in New York City, where we could have been thriving in that climate with 5 years of track record versus just now really getting started in earnest. All right, before we throw it over to you all for some questions. Just going to give you all a moment if there's something I forgot to ask or that didn't come up that you want to have some closing remarks on, and then we'll turn it to the audience.
I'll just end by saying thank you. You were wonderful. But you asked something about like how do you get cities to buy into this, because we are kind of an anomaly in different ways. West Hollywood's always an anomaly. But when we went to it's like a year ago, we were at National League of Cities in Atlanta, Georgia, right? So National League of Cities is a very interesting conference if you all choose to go. It's fine, it's in Tampa right now. I'm not legally allowed in Tampa for other reasons. But specifically, a lot of these cities are more conservative, right? They're very much like, they're hesitant to new technology. And when we had a panel on Serve Robotics there, it was a group of them, our vice mayor, Chelsea Byers, presented because she's, the robot champion in West Hollywood in so many ways. But specifically, so many people came up to her at the end and was like, how do we do this? Like, how do we move forward with these programs, right? And it were from cities that Kansas, I mean, all over the place, right? And it was so exciting because once you present city leaders in that space with this education, they do say yes, right? And I think the more we can get in front of leaders like that, the better, right? And I think that's the way to get in front of it. Like, all I do is see this bus right now, right over on this TV screen, right? And so I'm like, oh, that's interesting. We should put that in West Hollywood, right? My city looks at me like I'm crazy, right? But it's fascinating, right? Because we have people and we have diesel driving trucks that we pay for. So the city of West Hollywood pays for a bus system. We have our own metro system in West Hollywood for buses that drive around primarily empty, and it's gas, to pick up seniors and people that need it for low cost at all, little cost, to take them to their appointments at different areas of the city because we don't have a metro system like that, right? But this is an option, right? What does that future look like? You need to be in these spaces to really learn different aspects to help do something. And if we all don't do something about the climate crisis now or 40 years ago, like, we have to start thinking like that and where we're putting cars or less cars on the roads.
I'll just piggyback on the education piece. We also need to have a lot of the SMEs in the room for these educational moments. One of the stories I like to share is early on in the drone introduction or game to our particular region, and it's primarily used by law enforcement, public safety at this particular time. And we had a city mayor, I won't say the city name, mentioning, hey, when can we put some guns on these things?
That's Texas for you.
And these are city leaders. And without the SMEs in the room, and I was one who probably, I feel like the only one, because everybody else was law enforcement. So, and I was the only, and the law enforcement folks did speak up and say, we're not into doing that. And then I had to explain the various reasons why that's not a popular decision to be making. And that's stuff we need to do. And you need SMEs in the room also to mitigate unintentional consequences. With all of these new technologies, and you see it every day when we introduce these new technologies, I imagine my man Jarvis here is dealing with the micromobility here in the city and with the scooters and things of that nature. Unintended consequences come about. And to mitigate those, you got to have SMEs in the room in its inception.
I think I want to, close this out, I guess, a little bit with like the last couple of years has been really difficult, I think, for cities to be able to tell what technologies are going to succeed and what aren't. So you sometimes feel like you're over-indexing on whoever's in front of you, right? Like it can feel a little bit daunting and confusing. There were companies that were here 3 years ago that don't exist anymore. And there's going to be new companies that are here 3 years from now. We went through this, right? Like we were, I've been coming to this since 2018, and we are the CEO of Postmates. Serve was incubated inside of Postmates. The CEO of Postmates spoke on a panel alongside the CEO of Hyperloop. And I don't think anybody talks about Hyperloop in this room anymore. So we've been here on quite a long journey before we've gotten to this point, but we've also been commercially operating in West Hollywood for 5 years now. At that point, you reach a certain level of maturity where I think we're able to turn around to cities and say, hey, look, like this is serious. It's not a pipe dream anymore. We're not asking you for a little dinky pilot. what we're looking for is like we've done this in other places now. We're ready. Like this is what maturity looks like. And I think that the more difficult piece right now for folks is how do we improve infrastructure to actually enable ongoing proliferation of these technologies, and especially now that it's a little bit easier to tell. Waymo is like this too, right? Like a couple of years ago, people were still like, is self-driving going to work? And I think this is the year where we're going to see it. We're going to see it everywhere. I rode one yesterday, I rode one this morning, and I'm probably going to ride another one this afternoon, and it's incredibly impressive. And all of these technologies have made our community safer. Because automation is incredibly safer than a human driver. No matter how much you want to believe that you're a better driver than a computer, you're not. Like our robots have a 99.8% delivery completion rate. That means we fail 1 out of every 500 times. Most of those is us getting hit by cars. It's not mistakes we're making, or someone kicking a robot over, or tagging it. Our technology is good enough that we have an over, goodness, it's like 99.95% rate of success, which is like, on par with the airline industry. And so, when we're thinking about safety in our communities, I think it's really worth it to educate folks that all of the trips that we're doing are currently done by cars. And cars are incredibly dangerous, especially when they're driven by people. This is a real opportunity for us to take our public spaces back, make them safer, reduce our carbon emissions, especially since who knows whether cars will still have catalytic converters in a couple of years. So hopefully we can reduce some carbon emissions along the way.
I mentioned earlier this is my first CoMotion, but I've been coming to similar events for many years, and every year somebody says, this is the year that self-driving cars are going to take off, so maybe you'll be right this time.
I'm not even a techno-optimist, so.
Okay, we do have time for a few questions, but I don't know. All right, I see you, Stacy. I might have to give you my mic. Okay, there she is.
Thank you.
Ooh, wow.
Oh, no.
Nope.
Thank you. Great panel. Quick questions for Vicky. One, what is the top thing that you look for when you're expanding to cities? Is it friendly regulatory? Is it the infrastructure? Is it public policy? City leaders? What do you look for when you're making that decision to scale to another city?
Yeah, it's a little bit of all of the above.
But if you had to prioritize the top thing.
I'm going to say 3 things real quick. It's density, it's regulatory, and density is like projected volume that we would have in the city. There's a certain volume at which it makes sense to go and get real estate, to move a bunch of employees there. As much as we would love to, we probably are not going to be operating in Palmdale because Palmdale is not dense enough. We can't just have 3 robots that are operating alone with 1 employee that's maintaining them. In terms of regulatory, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. There's certain Texas has state preemption for us, so we can just go and roll out in Texas tomorrow. We don't have to ask anybody. The city can only regulate in very specific ways. That makes it easy. It also kind of perverts our incentives because it's going to direct us toward a city in Texas, whereas New York has a ban on any autonomous device. Not a ban, but it requires a hand on the wheel. And we don't even have a wheel, so we need to go and change state law in order to operate there. So there's other challenges on that front. And then the last one is sort of what kind of partnerships are available for us? What's the business climate like? Are we able to find that?
And then my second question is around the pricing model. So compared to DoorDash right now, how much cheaper are you in West Hollywood?
So we integrate directly with Uber Eats. So to a customer right now, it looks pretty identical. On the back end, we're able to beat the price of labor by almost half. That's not a thing that I think everyone's going to feel immediately, but I do think in the long term it's going to drive down the cost of delivery on its own just because of competition. And you don't have to tip them.
I tip them.
Thanks for paying my salary.
So, Stacy, I guess we're going to have to work on changing New York State law.
I'm interested for Ernest. You were talking about what regional infrastructure, or that you want regional infrastructure to support them. I'm interested in physically what that looks like. I understand the policy importance of it, but I'd love to understand that, like, physically.
Yeah, so we're talking about the sensor packages that are needed for the UTM piece. Sensor, low altitude weather sensors. Now, in terms of what those are, like I mentioned earlier, we don't know what those the winning technology is, and I'm not going to pick that. I'm waiting, and I'm telling my city governments to wait for the winning technology, or at least the FAA approved and possibly funded technology to use, and then go from there. But we're talking about sensor packaging, the data services needed, the VTE, so there's vehicle-to-vehicle communications needed. So you're gonna need 4G, Wi-Fi, broadband. You're gonna need all of those type of services for these technologies. And we're already deploying a lot of those internet technologies to these disenfranchised areas via other mechanisms, other grant programs. So those will be in the area. We just want to bring the other pieces.
I think we have time for like one more.
More of a comment, I guess, than a question, but I'm curious. Anthropomorphizing these things, brilliant. Had a chance to see two of them when I was going to visit Tale of the Pup. If you haven't been there, I recommend it. They have the little headlights blink like eyes, the names, and people were actually like, "Oh, look, it's trying to get across the street," and they're actually trying to help it as opposed to kick it over. So brilliant idea on the naming and all of that. Was that something that was there in the beginning, or did that come about later? How did you kind of end up with that? Since we're also in Little Tokyo, where you can go buy all sorts, you can buy pieces of bread that have eyes on them. So where'd that come from?
Yeah, it's a thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think when we did our early testing, if any of you are with the city that's interested, we can give you a tour of our offices either here or in Redwood City. Please find me. We have our original robot design there, and if any of you have seen the Hurt Locker, that's what it looked like. And when we would put it out on streets, people would come up to us and say, "Am I in danger?" And we realized pretty quickly that having these hard industrial designs wasn't doing us any favors. It was freaking people out, and it was difficult for people to tell what the robot was trying to do. You weren't able to signal intent. They were like, "What is it?" So as time went on, we started consulting with various groups. I mentioned that we did a pilot on a senior living facility, and we realized that the shape of the robot should look like a small shopping cart so that you understand that it's carrying food. We put the eyes on it because the eyes can signal intent. They can move in the direction that you're planning on moving in. It prevents, when you encounter another human being, you don't want to be playing chicken with them. It doesn't mean that you won't play chicken with a robot, but the fact that the robot's eyes move does help people find a frame of reference on how you navigate around them. And then with the names, we need some way for people to be able to identify them, say, even if there's an issue, right? Like a robot's been knocked over. Hey, I just saw that Omar's been tipped. Like, can someone come and get him? I even said him, right? Like it's really like it's an identifying feature, but it also has been an opportunity for us to really build a deeper tie-in. But we're also, the mayor had mentioned Marcia. Marcia came about because we had a partnership with, we worked with a local artist in West Hollywood who designed a Pride-themed robot. So every year during Pride, Scoot does a redesign of the wrap on the robot, and we named the robot after Marsha P. Johnson, who infamously threw the first stone at Stonewall, or the first, and so for us, these are opportunities for us to really engage with the community and take a technology that can often feel like, oh, it's some tech company in the Bay Area, and make it a lot more tactile. Our customers aren't the people who are buying the food. They're the people who are crossing the street with us, the people who are picking up the robots when they fall. It's regular people. And so, it's important for us to find ways to relate to them and build that level of trust.
All right. And with that, I'm going to thank the panel, John, Ernest, Viggy. Thank all of you for being an engaging audience. Stick around for the next session.